All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're taking a look at, well, a look inside.
Inside.
Yeah, inside the body. We've got this incredible chapter all about how our bodies handle, well, basically a constant attack
An attack from what or who?
from, well, everything. Like all the little microscopic things, bacteria, viruses, all that stuff. It's really fascinating.
So we're talking about the immune system then.
Exactly. But specifically, this chapter dives into the first line of defense.
The innate immune system.
That's it, the innate immune system. It's like the rapid response team, Always ready to go, always on patrol.
Right, and it's incredibly versatile too.
Yeah.
It can recognize a huge variety of threats, even without having encountered them before.
Yeah, the chapter mentions how it's different from the other part of the immune system, the adaptive one.
Exactly. Adaptive immunity is slower, more specialized. It takes time to develop, but it has this amazing ability to remember past encounters and tailor its response.
So innate is like the first responders, the security guards, and adaptive is the detectives who come in later to really get to know the culprit,
I
right?
like that analogy. Innate is fast and broad, adaptive is slower, but precise and has memory.
This chapter, though, it really delves into the nitty-gritty of the innate system, the cells, the mechanisms, it's all in there.
It's quite fascinating from how those cells recognize danger signals to the different ways they neutralize those threats.
There was one thing that really caught my eye in this chapter. It's about something we usually think of as bad. Amyloid beta protein.
Ah, yes. The chapter mentions a potential role for it in innate immunity, which is quite surprising given its association with Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, I was like, wait, what? This stuff that can cause so much damage might actually be helpful? How does that even work?
Well, the hypothesis is that it acts as an antimicrobial agent in the brain, trapping bacteria, sort of like, like sticky flypaper.
Yeah, it's like a defense mechanism.
Potentially, yes. But the problem might be when there's this constant chronic bacterial presence.
So it's like too much of a good thing.
Exactly. The idea is that this constant stimulation could lead to an overproduction of amyloid beta and eventually the formation of those plaques we see in Alzheimer's.
Wow, that's a really interesting connection. The chapter even mentioned research with a specific bacterium, Porphyromonas gingivalis? Something like that.
Porphyromonas gingivalis, yes. It's a bacterium involved in gum disease. And studies in mice have actually shown a link between infection with this bacterium and an increase in amyloid beta in the brain.
So gum disease could potentially contribute to Alzheimer's.
That's what the research suggests. And they've even found that inhibiting certain enzymes produced by P. gingivalis, these gingipanes, can actually reduce amyloid beta buildup.
Wow. So I guess our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack all of this, right? To go through this whole chapter on innate immunity and, well, understand it all.
Let's do it. And to really solidify our understanding, it's good to start with those core differences between innate and adaptive immunity.
Yeah, let's lay the groundwork. So we have these two arms of the immune system, the innate and the adaptive. What's the main difference again?
Well, innate immunity, it's your immediate defense. You're born with it, so
Yes.
it's always there, always ready. It's non-specific, meaning it targets a broad range of pathogens, not just specific ones.
So it doesn't need to learn about the enemy first, it just reacts.
Exactly. It recognizes those general danger signals, those patterns common to many pathogens, and it's incredibly fast, acting within hours.
But it doesn't have memory, right? Like it can't remember a specific enemy and prepare for a second attack.
That's right. It treats each encounter as new. And the key players in innate immunity, the ones doing the heavy lifting, are the phagocytes.
Those are the cells that engulf and destroy the invaders, right?
Precisely. Now, adaptive immunity, that's a different story. It's triggered when the innate system isn't enough. It takes longer to develop, several days, because it needs to learn about the specific threat.
So it needs to be trained like a specialized unit.
In a way, yes. It targets very specific antigens, those unique markers on pathogens, and it has this remarkable ability to remember those encounters.
So the next time it sees the same enemy, it's ready to go.
Exactly. It can mount a much faster and stronger response thanks to that memory.
Hmm.
And the key players in adaptive immunity are the lymphocytes, specifically B cells and T cells.
Got it. So innate is the rapid, broad defense, no memory, while adaptive is slower, specific, and has memory. Now, let's talk about where all these immune cells come from, right? The chapter mentioned the bone marrow and something called hematopoiesis.
Yes, all the cells of our immune system, both innate and adaptive, they originate from hematopoietic stem cells that reside in the bone marrow. These are remarkable cells that have the potential to differentiate into all the various blood cell types.
So the bone marrow is like the birthplace, the
Fact-
factory.
Exactly. It's the central hub of blood cell production, including all the different types of immune cells we're going to be talking about.
And once they're made, how do they get around? I mean, they need to be everywhere, right?
They travel through two main systems, the blood circulatory system and the lymphatic system. The blood is the primary transport network carrying these cells throughout the body.
And the lymphatic system, that's like the drainage system, right?
In a way, yes. It collects fluid that leaks from blood vessels and returns it to circulation.
Mm.
But importantly, it also plays a crucial role in transporting immune cells.
So it's like the back roads, the alternative route.
You could think of it that way, and there's this fascinating process called diapedesis, where leukocytes, those white blood cells, actually squeeze out of the blood vessels and into the tissues.
So they can get to where the action is, right? Where the infection is happening.
Exactly. Now, in addition to the bone marrow where they're born, there are also specific organs involved in immune function. They're categorized as primary and secondary lymphoid organs.
Okay, what are the primary ones?
The primary lymphoid organs are where the lymphocytes, the key players in adaptive immunity, develop and mature. For B cells, this happens in the bone marrow itself.
So they stay home?
Yes, they do. T cells, however, they start in the bone marrow but then migrate to the thymus to mature. It's a gland located in the chest.
So B cells mature in the bone marrow, T cells in the thymus. Got it. What about the secondary lymphoid organs? What do they do?
The secondary lymphoid organs are the sites where the adaptive immune response is initiated. These include the lymph nodes, strategically placed throughout the body, which filter lymph fluid and trap antigens.
So they're like checkpoints.
Yes, could say that. The spleen also acts as a filter, but for the blood, and it's where immune cells can encounter blood-borne pathogens.
So the lymph nodes check the lymph, the spleen checks the blood. What else?
We also have MALT, mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. It's found in the linings of the digestive, respiratory, and genitourinary tracts.
Those are all places where pathogens could easily get in, right?
Exactly. MALT acts as a first line of defense at those vulnerable entry points. Now, the chapter also mentioned cytokines and chemokines and how they influence hematopoiesis, the production of blood cells.
Right, so these are like signaling molecules, right? They tell the cells what to do.
Yes, they're chemical messengers that regulate the differentiation of those hematopoietic stem cells in the bone marrow, ensuring the right types of blood cells are produced in the right numbers.
So they're like the directors, the choreographers.
Precisely. Now let's talk about those different types of leukocytes, those white blood cells. They're broadly categorized into myeloid and lymphoid lineages.
Okay, let's start with the myeloid cells. The chapter said those are the key players in innate immunity.
Right. The main myeloid cells involved in innate immunity are monocytes, which mature into macrophages and dendritic cells. And then we have the granulocytes, which include neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils.
Okay, let's break those down. Monocytes, macrophages, dendritic cells, what do they do?
Well, both macrophages and dendritic cells are highly phagocytic, meaning they engulf and destroy pathogens. They're like the cleanup crew.
But they do more than just cleaning, right?
Absolutely. They also act as antigen-presenting cells, or APCs. They take those engulfed pathogens, break them down, and present fragments called antigens on their surface.
So they're like the intelligence gatherers.
Exactly. They present those antigens to the T cells, which then activates the adaptive immune response. So they're bridging the innate and adaptive systems.
They're like the messengers, the liaisons. What about those granulocytes? Neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, what do they do?
Neutrophils, also called PMNs, they're the most abundant white blood cell type. They're highly mobile and very good at phagocytosis. They're the first responders, the infantry.
The ones on the front lines fighting the battle. What about eosinophils?
Eosinophils are also phagocytic, but they specialize in fighting parasites, particularly large ones like worms. They release toxic enzymes that can damage the parasite's outer layer.
And finally, basophils.
Basophils, along with their tissue-resident counterparts called mast cells, they contain granules filled with histamine and other inflammatory mediators. When they're activated, they release these substances, contributing to inflammation.
So they're the ones responsible for that swelling and redness.
They play a key role in that, yes. Now let's move on to the lymphoid cells. We already talked about B cells and T cells, which are central to adaptive immunity.
Right, but the chapter mentioned that some lymphoid cells are also involved in innate immunity, right?
Yes, natural killer cells, or NK cells, they're part of the lymphoid lineage, but function primarily in innate immunity.
They sound pretty intense. What do they do?
NK cells are cytotoxic lymphocytes, meaning they can directly kill other cells. Their main targets are virus-infected cells and tumor cells.
So they're like the assassins, taking out the infected cells.
That's a good way to put it. They recognize their targets based on certain surface molecules, not specific antigens like T cells. They look for signs of distress or abnormalities.
How do they actually kill those cells?
They release cytotoxic granules containing proteins like perforin and granzymes. Perforin creates pores in the target cell membrane, allowing granzymes to enter and induce apoptosis, which is programmed cell death.
So it's a very controlled and targeted way of eliminating those problem cells. All right, let's shift gears and focus on the phagocytes again. How do they actually carry out this process of phagocytosis?
Well, the first step is recognizing the threat. Phagocytes have these pattern recognition receptors, or PRRs, that can recognize pathogen-associated molecular patterns, or PAMPs.
PMPs are like those common features, those red flags that pathogens have, right?
Exactly. Things like lipopolysaccharide, or LPS, which is found on gram-negative bacteria, or flagellin, the protein in bacterial flagella.
And the PRRs are the receptors that can detect those PMPs.
Precisely. When a PRR binds to its specific PAMP, it triggers a cascade of signaling events inside the phagocyte, leading to activation.
So it's like a lock and key system, the PMP being the key and the PRR the lock.
A great analogy. This binding activates the phagocyte, making it much more efficient at engulfing pathogens and destroying them.
Okay, so how does the actual engulfing happen?
The phagocyte extends these arm-like projections called pseudopods that surround the pathogen, eventually enclosing it in a membrane-bound vesicle called a phagosome.
So it basically swallows it whole.
In a way, yes. Then this phagosome fuses with a lysosome, which is an organelle filled with digestive enzymes and antimicrobial substances.
So it's like mixing the garbage with the garbage disposal.
Exactly. The resulting compartment, called a phagolysosome, is where the pathogen is broken down and destroyed.
What happens inside this phagolysosome? How does it actually kill the pathogen?
The phagolysosome creates a very hostile environment. It produces toxic oxygen compounds like hydrogen peroxide and superoxide, which damage the pathogen.
So it's like a chemical attack.
Yes, it's called the respiratory burst. And in addition to the toxic chemicals, the lysosome contributes its digestive enzymes, breaking down the pathogen's components.
Like a double whammy chemical and enzymatic attack. But the chapter mentioned that some pathogens have tricks up their sleeves, ways to evade this process.
Absolutely. Some produce substances that can neutralize those toxic oxygen compounds. For example, Mycobacterium tuberculosis has glycolipids that protect it.
So they've evolved ways to disarm the phagocyte.
In a sense, yes. Others produce toxins that can kill phagocytes, like Streptococcus pyogenes and Staphylococcus aureus.
So they fight back, literally attacking the immune cells.
Right. And some have ways to avoid being engulfed in the first place. Encapsulated bacteria, like Streptococcus pneumonia, have a slippery capsule that makes it hard to grab them.
So they're like, greased pigs, hard to catch.
Precisely. But our immune system has a countermeasure for that.
Yeah.
Opsonization.
What is that?
Opsonization is like tagging a pathogen, making it more recognizable and easier to engulf. It can be done with antibodies, which bind to the pathogen and signal to phagocytes to eat it.
So the antibodies are like flags saying, eat this.
Exactly. The other way is with the complement protein fragment called C3b, which also coats pathogens and makes them more appealing to phagocytes.
Okay, so it's like adding handles, making them easier to grab. So we've talked about phagocytes and how they engulf and destroy pathogens, but what about the other parts of the innate immune system?
Right. There are several other important components. Inflammation, for example.
Yeah, everyone's experienced that, the redness, the swelling, the pain. What's actually going on there?
Well, inflammation is a complex response to injury or infection. It's triggered by the release of signaling molecules, mainly cytokines and chemokines, from damaged tissues and immune cells.
So it's like a distress signal, a call for help.
Yes, and those signals cause blood vessels to widen and become more permeable.
So more blood flow to the area, hence the redness.
Right, and the increased permeability allows fluid to leak into the tissues, causing swelling.
And what about the pain?
Some of those signaling molecules can actually stimulate nerve endings, causing pain. And then those chemokines we talked about earlier, they attract more immune cells to the site.
So it's like a coordinated response, bringing in the reinforcements. But I remember the chapter mentioned that inflammation can also be dangerous, right? Like with septic shock.
That's right. When inflammation becomes systemic, meaning it spreads throughout the body, it can be very dangerous.
So localized inflammation is good, systemic inflammation is bad.
Exactly. Septic shock happens when there's a massive release of cytokines, often due to a widespread bacterial infection. This can cause a dramatic drop in blood pressure and damage to vital organs.
So it's like the immune system overreacting, going into overdrive.
That's a good way to put it.
Hmm.
Now, another important part of the innate immune system is fever.
Ah, yes, the classic symptom of feeling sick. Why does our body temperature go up?
Well, fever is triggered by substances called pyrogens. Some are produced by our own immune cells, like those cytokines we talked about. Others come from pathogens themselves.
So our body is actively raising its temperature. Why would it do that?
It actually helps fight off infection. A slightly elevated temperature can inhibit the growth of some pathogens, and it can also increase the activity of our immune cells.
So it's like turning up the heat, making the environment less hospitable for those invaders. All right, what about the complement system? The chapter mentioned it as a cascade of proteins.
The complement system is fascinating. It's a series of over 30 proteins that circulate in the blood, normally inactive.
So they're just waiting to be activated. What triggers that?
There are three main pathways. The classical pathway is triggered by antibodies binding to pathogens.
So a connection to the adaptive immune system there.
Exactly. Then there's the MBL pathway, triggered by mannose binding lectin, which recognizes certain sugars on pathogens.
And that's part of the innate system, right?
Yes. And then there's the alternative pathway, which is spontaneously activated on microbial surfaces.
So three different ways to start the cascade, but what happens once it's activated?
All three pathways converge on the same key steps, ultimately leading to a variety of outcomes. One is the formation of the membrane attack complex, or MAC.
What does that do?
The MAC basically punches holes in the membrane of pathogens, causing them to burst and die.
Wow, pretty dramatic. What else?
The complement system also enhances phagocytosis through opsonization, that tagging process we talked about earlier, and it also promotes inflammation.
So it's a multi-pronged attack, directly killing pathogens, making them easier to eat, and calling in more immune cells. Impressive. We already talked about NK cells earlier, so what's left? Interferons, right?
Yes, interferons are a group of signaling proteins that play a key role in defending against viruses.
How do they work?
Well, when a cell is infected by a virus, it releases interferons. These interferons then bind to neighboring cells and trigger them to produce antiviral proteins.
So it's like a warning signal, telling those cells to prepare for a viral attack.
Exactly. And those antiviral proteins can then interfere with the virus's ability to replicate and spread.
So it's a way to limit the damage, to contain the infection. Well, I think we've covered just about everything in this chapter on innate immunity.
We've certainly gone through all the major points, from the different types of cells involved to the mechanisms they use to recognize and destroy pathogens.
And we even touched on some of the fascinating research linking innate immunity to things like Alzheimer's disease.
It really highlights the complexity and interconnectedness of these systems. The body is constantly working to defend itself, even in ways we might not expect.
And this chapter has given us a much deeper understanding of that first line of defense, the innate immune system. It's always there, ready to react, even before we're aware of the danger.
It's a truly remarkable system. And knowing how it works, how it protects us, might even inspire us to make choices that support its function. Things like getting enough sleep, eating a healthy diet, managing stress, those all play a role.
So it's not just about understanding the science, it's about applying that knowledge to our lives. That's a great takeaway. And with that, I think we can confidently say that we've thoroughly covered this entire chapter on innate immunity. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.